Hello everybody, my name is Tom Lance. I work for Tribe of Kodiak. I am the Natural Resources Director, jack of all trades, master of none. But I do have a strong background in working with soils. In a former life I used to be a soil conservationist. And today I'm going to talk to you about understanding Kodiak's soils and the kinds of properties that soils have on Kodiak Island that make them a challenge for our use in our growing vegetables, growing crops, growing flowers, whatever. And also our varied climate has something to do with how our soils perform as well. So I'll give you a little information about that, and from those basic principles you'll, I hope, have a better understanding of what you need to do to improve your soil, be it in your hoop house or in your raised bed, or that sort of thing. So let's begin. So first of all, as we know, soil's influence can range anywhere from the top of the mountain, and I like to say to the bottom of the ocean, since we're in this island community. Soil, from a soil scientist point of view, only exists on land and then into the estuary areas of our marine ecosystem. But soil chemistry influences everything, water and air, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So why is soil important for you and me? Well, first of all, we grow our food on soil. We also grow fiber, such as wood products. We grow plants that have medicine. Many of our pharmaceutical products are developed, or were originally developed from plants, and now there are, better living through chemistry, analogs of those plant chemicals now. It also, I like to say, it's the filter. Soil is the filter for our landscape. It's the kidneys of our landscape, and it filters water, and it stores nutrients and other important functions as well, and I'll talk about that in a little bit here. But it also provides a place for shelter for wildlife, for soil microbes and bacteria, fungi. It also provides anchorage, a place to put our building, a place to put your anchor for your boat. It provides the foundation for trees to spread their roots, and that's what I mean by anchorage. First and foremost, soil should be considered a living organism because it has to have organic matter and life, organisms, in order to be considered soil, and so therefore it's an organism. It's a living organism. So for a generally healthy soil, we want to see about 25% air, 25% water, and then the 10% organic and 40% mineral soil. And we will talk about that a little bit, how that is decided, how do you determine that. I also have a slide here about what soil is. It's a function of 5 different factors, and I won't spend much time explaining them. Some of them are self-evident. For example, relief. It depends upon the relief is the slope or the aspect, north, south, east, west. Time is perhaps one of the most important ones. Some soils take millennia, have taken a millennium to form. But climate, parent material, organisms, relief, and time make up the 5 soil forming factors, and you need to think about each one of those when you're working in your garden or your raised bed. And the acronym for that is CPORT. So there's an example in the one slide of the 5 forming factors and how each one, what makes up each one. For instance, organisms would be plants and animals. Parent material would be the physical aspects, and the chemical aspects, like the basement rock that eroded and eventually broke down into particles, which then provided the space for organic matter to settle into, and then organisms to settle into, and to make a true soil. Because again, soil is living. It has to have organic matter, and as well as mineral matter and life. Again, when you're farming, ranching, growing vegetables, we're pretty much looking at the upper topsoil, which is the upper layer of soil, which is the about the first couple inches down to maybe 8 or 10 inches of soil. That's where the roots are primarily going to reside. That's where most of the nutrients are. That's where most of the life in the soil are the worms and bugs and bacteria and fungi. If you were in a soil that's formed in the bottom of a river valley, you might see very high silt soils, clay soils, lots of blue and gray colors, what we call glade colors. And then if you're in an upland area where you've got lots of, let's say, grass and eroded leaves, trees, alders, willows, trees, they all decompose and make a nice organic layer. Those are all high in nutrients, and therefore the soils, when they decompose, since all life is on Earth is made up of carbon, a lot of that carbon, and carbon is black, when it decomposes, it will color our soil black or dark colors. And so soil carbon is a very important part of all soil. A soil pedon is a description of a block of soil that is a complete unit that's definable, and it's used by soil scientists to describe a name of a soil that occurs in a particular area, like a Menasca soil. That soil will have these different horizons, and the top horizon is strictly the O horizon, or I should say strictly, it's the O horizon where plant material is definable. You can see the broken stems, the leaf pieces, maybe dead bugs, organic matter that's definable. That's the O horizon. Just below that is the A horizon, where you don't have definable parts of plants or animals, but it's very dark, and that's where the soil carbon then is starting to accumulate, coming out of those decomposing plants, for example. And then the next horizon below that is the B horizon, and that's considered a zone of accumulation, where not only does it accumulate any residual carbon that didn't get already locked up and held in the A horizon, but it also, some of the other nutrients, minerals that'll leach out, that are water soluble, will leach out, and then they'll accumulate in that B horizon, and those generally are lighter colors because there's not as much carbon there. And then finally down at the bottom of the pit, you can see what's called the C horizon, where you have slightly weathered, the start of the ground, bedrock layer, and just below that then is the bedrock. We call it regolith, or the hard, unweathered and slightly weathered at the very margin of the C and R. Soil properties are very important. Keep in mind that if you don't have the right structure, the right texture of the soil, the proper wetness of the soil, the proper soil fertility, and the soil pH, you will have a hard time producing any vegetables, any produce. So I'll talk just briefly about that. Soil texture, again, is one of the most important elements when you're making a vegetable bed. I do not like to grow my carrots where I have a lot of gravel, for example, in mixed in with the soil, because obviously it causes your carrots to grow funny, and it'll leave stones and stuck to into the tissue and that kind of thing. But sand, silt, and clay are the three most important parts when we're figuring out soil texture. Clay being the finest of the particles, you can't hardly see it, if at all, and if you were to put it in your hand and rub soil with a little bit of water, you could feel that floury, smooth, slippery texture to it. If you feel a lot of that, that means that you have quite a bit of clay in your soil. If you feel a lot of grit, that means you have quite a bit of sand in your soil, which is a larger particle size. And then if it's somewhere in between the two, that means that it's in between the two, and it's called silt. So what do we want in our soils for our growing our produce? Well, we want something that's fairly sandy, a sandy silt loam. And loam is a mixture of quite a bit of organic matter mixed in with your sand and silt. And those are our ideal growing soils because it allows for water movement and air movement and root penetration. One quick slide here is called the textural class triangle, how to determine your soil texture. And I know some of you have probably done this already, either your kids or yourself have learned about this, and I won't go into any detail, but here's an example of a pretty good soil, 35% sand, 55% silt, 10% clay. And that falls into a category called a silt loam. I like a sandy loam myself. I try to mix in where I find sand. Sometimes I will collect a little bit of sand when I'm collecting beach peat, for example. I'll just because I'm picking up the peat, I end up with quite a bit of sand in the bottom of the bucket. And I'll try not to pick beach peat from a spot that's got a lot of gravel. I'll pick my beach peat in areas that are fairly sandy, so that sandy component I can then use to put in with my soil mix when I'm trying to make an improved soil for my raised beds. Structure has to do with whether it's granular, blocky, platy, and it'll affect the way your wetting and drying takes place, root action, animal activity, all have influences on the structure of a soil. And that's important because structure affects, especially soil hydrology, how fast water will move through the soil, and also, of course, plants with their roots. I have another slide here showing, for example, on the far right, you'll see a soil that has a very platy structure to it, and you'll see that it's a very tortuous path for that water to move through the soil. If you find something like that, like if you have, for example, a soil that's got a lot of clay in it and it's been compacted, some ash maybe too in there, it will stop or restrict greatly the movement of roots and water and air, and you don't want that in your upper 10 inches of soil. So break it up, mix it up, put more organic matter into it, put a little bit of sand into it, and that'll help break it up. And then color. Color is a good indicator of soil fertility, and as well as the chemical activities that are taking place. And you all know this, if it's kind of red, it looks like rust. It's probably oxidizing irons, and if you see that, it's an indication perhaps of water table movement, as well as when you get into the blue, gray colors, you'll see maybe anoxic or low oxygen conditions. And if you have that in your raised beds or in your soils, then that's probably not going to be very productive for you. And it also will affect, it also has some pH problems too with acidity. So avoid that. And soil color is just like going to the store looking for paint. They use paint colors. Well, soil scientists define soil color using a Munsell color chart, color book, and if you're interested in that kind of thing, please see the Conservation District. They have several copies of the Munsell Color Book. And we do have a soil survey for Kodiak, at least the northeastern Kodiak Island area. It was published in 1960. It's still an excellent document. I know they're trying to update it. They started working on it 10 years or so ago, and they still have not released, as far as I know, the final update of it. But it's a very handy and very interesting document. I guess the bottom line is you can adjust your soil with just basic ingredients we have around us. For example, I have found very good soil in my yard, and when I am digging a hole, for example, for a post, or I had to put in a new water line, I actually hit a layer below the volcanic ash. So it was a layer of very dark, rich soil. Well, why is that there? Well, just think of this. In 1912, when Nova Rupta, the volcano blew, it covered the ground with ash. Well, what was there? That was the surface of the soil. So it covered up a bunch of organic matter as well as the old buried A horizon. So that's a very rich soil, and if you can find pockets of that, save that. I'm always saving my soil, stockpiling it, because I know I will need it to build another bed or help renew some of my used beds. Because the organic matter will slowly decompose, and have you ever noticed in your bed the level of the bed is dropping? Well, that's because all the organic matter is decomposing and it's turning into a mineral soil, and some of it is decomposing and off-gassing, and so you want to save all that good material. And volcanic ash doesn't necessarily make a great mix. It feels a little bit on the silt texture side. It depends on what layer of the volcanic ash. There were 3 different textures that came out of the Nova Rupta eruption, with the finest material being the last of the tail end of the volcanic eruption. The heaviest material that fell out first is the material that you want. It's a little bit larger silt size, but you don't want a lot of it because it will be somewhat like a clay. It's like in that it'll bind together and it'll form a platy type soil structure, which will inhibit water and air movement. So to conclude this part of the talk, I'm at the last picture here. Things that you want to consider when you're going to locate a greenhouse, or maybe look for better a soil source. For example, if you can't build your soil with just beach peat and your poor soil that we have here, it's called reading the landscape. I like to think of it as being able to look and see. You can see geology and time taking place, and when you dig a hole in the ground, you're actually looking at a soil as a time machine. You're looking back through time at what happened. All the different layers are telling a story, and if you know how to interpret that story, you can take advantage of it and put it to use in your garden, and whether you're in a hoop house or outside. So if you take a look at that last picture, you can see some question marks. Reading the landscape can help you determine where there might be a gravel deposit, or there might be silty loam deposits, for example, on the edges of terraces from edges of floodplains. I'm not advocating you to go out to the Buskin River and dig in the side of the bank and pull out, some old buried, some old soil, but these are just things to think about when you're maybe working on your own piece of private land. So finally, the last picture is a picture of of the livestock in Pasag um, being managed for a grazing resource. And I thank you very much for your time. And if you have any questions, please call me. My phone number is on the title slide of this talk. Thank you again.